Billy Graham once said, "It is the Holy Spirit's job to convict, God's job to judge, and my job to love." You know, one of the most striking effects that came out of the first couple of years of COVID, from a sociological or societal standpoint, to me at least, was the way it brought nearly the entire world's attention into a singular focus. In other words, if you think about any given average day before the pandemic, with all the drastically different countries and cultures and political and economic systems around the globe, and the endless number of unique challenges and major events affecting those individual countries and cultures on any given day, the fact that there was actually anything that had the power to draw the entire world's attention to a singular focus at the same point in history is not only incredibly compelling in and of itself, but it's also incredibly rare. I mean, it does happen at points throughout history. Large-scale wars, think World War II, right? Global pandemics like COVID and certainly others before it. Massive natural disasters, some of the cataclysmic earthquakes of the past. Major economic collapse like the Great Depression, right? Although rare, there are points along the way throughout history that have drawn the world's attention into a singular focus. And it is in those historical moments that the church has a unique opportunity to capture the attention of the world by offering a way forward that cannot be found anywhere else. But you know, the same is often true on any given day, maybe not on a global scale, but maybe in your country or your community or in your family or in some other area of your life where there's something happening that has gripped the unavoidable attention of everyone around it, including you. Some crisis or circumstance or relationship or situation that has drawn the attention of everyone around it into a singular focus. And here's why that matters, because in those moments in your life, and I know there are many of you experiencing one of those moments in your life right now, it is in those moments that your response can either be driven by your need or by your faith. And the difference in those two responses determines how you represent Christ in the midst of that crisis, more specifically, how you point others to Him while walking through it, how you treat the other people who are in it with you, and how effectively you are to fulfilling your calling in the midst of it. And so it's important that in those times, you're not just paying attention to your own need. Of course, that's profoundly important, but also to the need of those around you who are affected by whatever it is that's going on as well. Because, listen, often that's the reason God put you there to begin with. By the way, there's almost always a physical aspect to the spiritual equation that God has you factored into, a direct correlation between how we respond to people's physical needs and their willingness to allow us to address their spiritual needs as well, which is why Jesus' sharing of the gospel was nearly always accompanied by Him feeding and protecting and delivering and healing people. Because when you meet someone's immediate physical need, often through the work of the Holy Spirit, it opens their heart to the message of the gospel, which of course not only addresses their physical needs, but their spiritual and eternal needs as well. So as people within your sphere of influence focus their collective attention on a singularly powerful problem, you have perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to offer a singularly powerful answer to not only what ails them physically, emotionally, psychologically, but spiritually and eternally as well. Just in case you don't feel up to the task, because in the midst of your circumstances, maybe you feel overwhelmed yourself, just remember, God doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't miscalculate anything. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them, David said. Which means God didn't make a mistake or miscalculate the timing of creating you at this very moment in history while you're going through whatever it is you're going through. You understand that, right? Whatever you're going through is exactly what you were created for And not just what, but when. So again, whatever is afflicting you in the world right now, or in this country, or in this community, or in your family, or in your life in general, whatever it is, God didn't place you here at this point in time so that you could hone your skills at complaining about politics or whoever's in power or whatever the thing is. Right? He didn't place you here at this point in time so that you could just be frustrated or broken or hopeless or aimless because of it. No, God placed you specifically here on this earth at this very point in time so that you, who He created and called and equipped for this very moment, could do something about it. He specifically created you for such a time as this, which means you have a choice to make because He's going to accomplish His will either way, as His word demonstrates time and time again. During one particularly critical time for the Israelites while on the brink of destruction, if you were with us when we went through Esther, or if you've read the book of Esther, you know this story, that she was the queen. She had an opportunity at great risk to herself to try and save the Jews by approaching and speaking to the king on her behalf, which was strictly forbidden under penalty of death unless you were first invited by the king to speak to him. And yet Esther had not been invited to speak to the king. And so after she initially resists the request from her relative Mordecai to speak to the king on the Israelites' behalf to save them from imminent death, Mordecai sends Esther this message. He says, if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. In other words, look, God's going to accomplish His will one way or the other. But you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether you've not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther 4:14, this time of crisis, tragedy. In other words, I know you're going to have to risk a lot in order to help save God's people. But Esther, that's precisely why He created you at this moment in time. So don't blow it. Don't miss your once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help bring salvation to other people. That's what you were created for such a time as this. Okay, it's the same today. You're here on this earth precisely when you're supposed to be here, which means whether you like it or not, you are an intended part of the equation you're in. A part of His plan to provide salvation to people who are not only lost, but maybe for the first time and only time in their lives, because of whatever the crisis is, they may be open to the message of the gospel. What an unbelievably powerful and rare opportunity you have right now to point people to Jesus. How? By serving them more than you serve yourself and making the most of everything He's given you as you share the love of Christ with people who are grasping for answers. It's sort of like this is what you've been training for, okay? This is the mission you've been sent on. I'm simply saying don't blow it. Don't miss a potential opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to lead someone to Christ who might otherwise never be willing to even consider Him as an option. Okay? You were created for such a time as this, and it's what we have such a timely example of in our story today as we continue our sermon series, working our way through the book of 1 Samuel, where the story focuses on 4 different people who are all at very different places in their lives in terms of taking responsibility for the time they've been given on this earth, and in turn, their commitment or lack of commitment to making the most of it while they can. And as you might expect, there's a stark contrast in the results those 4 lives have on the people around them, as we'll see. So let's turn to 1 Samuel chapter 2 and pick the story up where we left off last week and see how, listen, what may appear to be your darkest hour can actually become your finest hour. When you understand that this moment in time, no matter what's happening, is exactly the moment you were created and gifted and equipped and prepared not only to live in, but to thrive in. We'll begin at 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 12 through 21. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. The custom of the priests with the people was that when any man offered a sacrifice, the priest's servant would come while the meat was boiling with a 3-pronged fork in his hand. He would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. all that the fork brought upon the priest would take for himself. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." And if the man said to him, "Let them burn the fat first, and then take as much as you wish," he would say, "No, you must give it now, and if not, I will take it by force." Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. Samuel was ministering before the Lord, a boy clothed with a linen ephod, and his mother used to make for him a little robe and take it to him each year when she went up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. Then Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord give you children by this woman for the petition she asked of the Lord." So then they would return to their home. Indeed, the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord. Over the past 2 weeks, through the first chapter and a half of this book, the story has focused on Hannah and how God turned in his perfect timing great times of trouble and distress in her own life into something wonderful, bringing Samuel into the picture, who will grow up in the service of the temple and of the high priest, and ultimately in service to God as the last great judge in Israel, which is where the story picks up here as we begin to learn about the environment that Samuel's growing up in. And so we're told that Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, the high priest, who serve as priests themselves at the tabernacle and would have been like older brothers to Samuel. They were worthless men, which is the phrase Bain Bel El Yalal, in the ancient Hebrew. It literally means sons of Belial. Okay, Belial was a pagan god, and in the New Testament, the ancient Greek version of that same phrase was used to refer to anyone who was considered to be the antithesis of the Christ. So these were the priests in charge of the worship of God by the people of God. There was no greater responsibility in all of Israel, and yet according to verse 1, they did not know the Lord, which explains their outrageous violations of God's holy laws concerning their worship of him. Okay, according to the Mosaic law, when the sacrifices were brought to the tabernacle, a portion was to be given to God, a portion was to be given to the priest, and a portion was to be kept by the one who brought the offering. And more specifically, the priest was to receive a part of the breast and the shoulder of the animal being sacrificed, which was clearly laid out in Leviticus 7:28 through 36, also chapter 10, verses 12 through 15, Numbers 18:17 through 19, and then again in Deuteronomy 18:3. I can give you any of these references if you want them later. But now here we are, some 400 years after the law of Moses was given. The priestly custom had changed, but not for the better. Instead of taking the prescribed portion of the breast and shoulder, Hophni and Phinehas were taking whatever they could bring up out of the pot with a giant fork, which probably everyone knew was wrong. And to make matters worse, everyone also knew that the fat of the sacrifice was to be burnt as an offering to the Lord first, according to Leviticus 17:6 and Numbers 18:17, okay? So God's portion was always given first. And since the fat was considered the most luxurious part, the best part of the animal, the fat went to God, and again, it went first. The idea being God should always be given our first and our best offerings, which, by the way, has not changed. That expectation by God still applies to our lives today. Our time, our money, our talent, our passion, our skills, and so on. But the sons of Eli were taking the portions of their choosing, and they were taking it first, even before they burned the fat. The priest's servant would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." Of course, the raw meat was preferable because then they could prepare it any way they pleased. And even more desirable than that, raw meat was much easier to sell than cooked or boiled meat, which meant they could make a significant amount of extra money off of the sacrifices that were intended for God. And the people knew it was wrong, which is why they would reply with, "Let them burn the fat first and then take as much as you wish." But in response, the priests through their servants would threaten the people with violence until the people gave in. This was a grossly sacrilegious practice, taking whatever part of the offerings intended for worship they wanted and serving themselves before they served the Lord. And it wasn't only that these brothers were not worshiping God as they should, They were causing the rest of the people of God to stumble in their own worship as well by offering unacceptable sacrifices and through greed, violence, and intimidation, making others not even want to come and bring their offerings at all. But then in stark contrast, in verses 18 through 21, we find Samuel, even with all the influence these brothers had over the worship at the tabernacle and over him directly. Think about it. Samuel's still very young at this point. Jewish tradition tells us he was no more than 12 years old at this point in the story. While Hophni and Phinehas were the priests, they clearly had tremendous influence over the people of God, and yet their continual access to and influence over Samuel was far greater than their limited interactions with the rest of the people. So imagine being 12 years old, away from your family since you were 3 years old, and the biggest influences in your life, the very men you're supposed to be able to emulate, are profaning the worship of God and leading the people of God to do the same. From the outside looking in, it seems like an incredibly unfair situation for Samuel to be raised in, right? He's just a boy. He has no power over these crooked priests. He cannot control the circumstances he's living in or what he's being exposed to. And yet all the while, this seemingly helpless boy is pointing people back to God. Certainly his parents and even Eli, the high priest himself, as we'll see, because somewhere in the midst of the chaos and strife and violence and uncertainty about the future and even his own living arrangements, Samuel seemed to understand that he was exactly where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to be there, as unfair as it was. Because the truth is, this is what Samuel was created for. To point the people of God back to God, even when the world around him seemed like it was coming unhinged, falling apart. What a timely example of that Samuel is for all of us today, whenever we're facing great uncertainty about what we're dealing with and how it will affect our future and our families and our jobs and our living arrangements and the church and the economy and our bank accounts, our entire way of life, right? What an example we have in Samuel, who shows us that even in the midst of such great uncertainty, this moment, no matter what happens in this moment, you were created for such a time as this. At this moment in your life, it then raises the question that you really need to answer if you're going to fully realize the part that God created you to play at this moment in history as you face the uncertainty of all that is happening in your life today. Ask yourself, how does my life point others to Jesus? Because listen, if you spend more time worrying about what might happen to you tomorrow than you do pursuing what God has promised to do through you today, then you are probably not pointing people to Jesus. As bad as Samuel's world was becoming, as much evil as he was surrounded by and exposed to at the highest levels, growing up far from his family, far from a safe environment, far from any guarantees about what might happen to him as a part of this priestly order that was blatantly opposing God at every turn. In spite of all that, there's no indication that Samuel was doing anything other than exactly what God created him to do. Samuel was ministering before the Lord, and he grew in the presence of the Lord. That's it. He didn't allow the direction of his life to be dictated to him by the chaos around him, and he didn't allow it to stop him from doing exactly what he was created to do, no matter how bad the circumstances became. And I'm telling you, we could learn a lot from this little boy, because God knew when he created you that you would be living through something difficult right now, and he knew the effect it would have on those around you, on your home, on your job, on your family, on your friends, on your church, on your finances, on whatever areas of your life. And yet, knowing just how bad it would all be, he chose to create you anyway. You get that? He didn't speed up the process of creating you or hit the pause button to slow things down to avoid the crisis. No, he created you precisely when he wanted you to be alive on this earth for such a time as this. You understand, when God looked into the future and saw what you would be dealing with today and all the havoc it would wreak in your life, knowing exactly what would need to be done in response so that he might be glorified even in all of this, he chose you. He chose you to be his response. He chose you for such a time as this. And if that sounds heavy, like a profound responsibility that has been placed on your shoulders for such a time as this, then you're starting to get the picture, because the weight of that responsibility couldn't be any more profound. But listen, as heavy as it may be, it isn't complicated. It may be hard, but it's not hard to figure out. In fact, it's quite simple. You see, you have been put here on this earth for such a time as this, for one very simple reason: to glorify Jesus Christ by pointing people to him. And we'll talk more about how you do that in a moment. But look, we need to ask ourselves, is my life pointing people to Jesus Christ today? In spite of the crisis, the struggles, the challenges that I'm experiencing right now, is my life pointing people to Jesus Christ? Because that is expressly why you've been put here on this planet for such a time as this, because someone in your life right now is looking for answers more than perhaps any other time in their lifetime. Which means you and I, since we're the ones here now, we have been given the high honor and the heavy responsibility of pointing them to Jesus. Let's not blow it. Let's not miss the opportunity to point them to Jesus Christ. It's the entire reason you're here for such a time as this. Songwriter Aaron Gillespie once said, "If I'm not pointing people to Jesus, then I'm wasting my life." Let's keep reading verses 22 through 26. Now Eli was very old, and he kept hearing all that his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he said to them, "Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all these people. No, my sons, it is no good report that I hear the people of the Lord spreading abroad. If someone sins against a man, God will mediate for him. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him?" But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for it was the will of the Lord to put them to death. Now the boy Samuel continued to grow, both in stature and in favor with the Lord, and also with man. So on top of everything else, these two vile men were doing to profane the worship of Yahweh. They're violating the women who serve at the temple. Exodus 38:8 describes women who were conscripted to serve in much the same way as the Levites at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And so just to be clear, these women came to the tabernacle specifically to serve and worship God. And yet Hophni and Phinehas were treating them like the temple prostitutes of the pagan Canaanite religions. And so their father Eli comes to his sons and questions what they're doing and tells them that it's not good. But notice he stops woefully short of what he could have done and should have done. Okay, as the high priest, Eli had the authority to remove his sons from service and restore the worship at the tabernacle. But he does neither, which ends up bringing judgment not only on Hophni and Phinehas, but on Eli and his entire family line, as we'll see. And so everything that was intended to be dedicated to the worship of God, these priests were taking for themselves, including the women who had dedicated their lives to the service and worship of Yahweh. And listen, it didn't get any worse than this. These men whose lives were supposed to be devoted to serving God and his people only served themselves. And meanwhile, the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man. What a stark contrast, right? And again, what a lesson for us. While the priests were getting it all wrong, this boy Samuel was getting it all right. He was growing not only in stature and in favor with the Lord, but also with man. Why with man? Because Samuel put others before himself, as we'll see as his story unfolds. Samuel put others before himself, unlike this entire priestly order of men and their servants who Samuel lived with, who were stealing from God, extorting people under the threat of violence, and violating women in the worst of ways. And even though we know from chapter 3 that Samuel didn't know the Lord yet personally, he was learning that if he was going to fulfill his purpose in this life, that would mean pointing people to God. And one of the most effective ways of doing that is by putting others before yourself, even when no one else around you is doing that. In fact, especially when no one else around you is doing that. Okay, in times of crisis, when everyone else is fighting for themselves, if you will fight for others, your opportunities to point people to Jesus will skyrocket, because in times of real crisis, people turn to those who are focused on helping others. which means when you're facing crisis in your own life, ask yourself, how does my life serve others more than myself? Because listen, our words matter without question, but it is our actions that give weight to our words. And as Christians, we talk about serving God and serving others all the time, as we should, and that sounds great, until a crisis comes and our actions don't match our words. Then we create a spiritual crisis on top of a physical one. Because look, when your words and your actions are saying the same thing and you're a follower of Jesus Christ, then you're pointing people to Him even as you draw closer to Him yourself, whether you realize it or not. But when your words and your actions are sending two very different messages, I'm telling you, people will ignore your words and instead pay attention to your actions, because it is your actions that are telling the truth about you. This is exactly what was happening with Hophni and Phinehas. They dressed like priests, they talked like priests, they represented themselves as priests, but their actions sent a very different message, and everyone could see it, and it turned people away from God. Okay? When your actions and your words aren't saying the same thing, you will lead others away from Christ every time, whether you realize it or not. It's a fact. People will follow what you do before they will follow what you say. People will follow what you do before they will follow what you say. So if you want people to take what you have to say seriously, then your actions had better line up with your words, because you can talk about how much you love Jesus and other people all you want to, but if the majority of your life is spent loving yourself more than you love others, people will see right through your words. It's not hard. Actually, it's not hard to tell what matters to most people in their lives. It's not hard to tell what matters to them the most. You just look at where they spend their money and their time and their energy and their focus, what they talk about, what they long for, what they aspire to achieve in their lives. Look, if it all points to Christ, then what they say about Him will all line up with what they do for Him and for other people. But listen, if your money and time and energy and focus is largely spent on personal pursuits, people, especially those who are around you, those who see you, well, they can see that too. And your words won't have any weight with them. And during times of crisis, all of that gets amplified. Because as Christians, we make big claims about what we believe and who we follow. We talk a lot about loving and serving others. And when times are good, most people probably aren't even paying that much attention. But when times turn hard, the world is all of a sudden looking for the church to make good on those claims. And before you think to yourself, well, I didn't sign up for this. Well, I hate to be the bearer of difficult news, but God signed you up for this the moment He decided you were the best man for the job or the best woman for the job by creating you precisely when He did for such a time as this. And so in your time of crisis, are you still looking to the needs of others or only to yourself? Are you checking on others? Or are you praying for them? Or are you meeting their needs even as you address your own? And I'm just telling you, this is a tough one. If the crisis you're facing is because of someone else who's done something against you, are you praying for them? Or are you plotting their demise? Are you attentive even to their needs, physical, spiritual, emotional, and otherwise? Or would you rather brood over what they've done to you? When people look at you, do they see someone whose actions line up with their words, someone who's serving other people more than they serve themselves, someone who even loves their enemies? Or is it all about me first? Because if you want to point people to Jesus, then serving yourself is going to have to end up somewhere further down on the list. Because simply acting religious and saying all the right things, I'm telling you, that won't get you very far with people who are actually hurting and in need of help. C.S. Lewis once said, "How is it that people who are quite obviously eaten up with pride can say they believe in God and appear to themselves very religious? I'm afraid it means they're worshiping an imaginary God." Let's finish the story for today, verse 27 to the end of the chapter. And there came a man of God to Eli and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, did I indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt, subject to the house of Pharaoh? Did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? I gave to the house of your father all of my offerings by fire from the people of Israel. Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I command for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel? Therefore the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promised that your house and the house of your father should go in and out before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. Then in distress you will look with envious eye on all the prosperity that shall be bestowed on Israel, and there shall not be an old man in your house forever. The only one of you whom I shall not cut off from my altar shall be spared to weep his eyes out, to grieve his heart. And all the descendants of your house shall die by the sword of men. And this that shall come upon your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, shall be the sign to you. Both of them shall die on the same day. And I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who shall do according to what is in my heart and in my mind. And I will build him a sure house. And he shall go in and out before my anointed forever. And everyone who is left in your house shall come to implore him for a piece of silver or a loaf of bread, and shall say, please put me in one of the priest's places, that I may eat a morsel of bread. So after Eli half-heartedly confronts his sons about their transgressions, going right back to business as usual, an unnamed man of God, a prophet, comes to Eli and delivers a harsh but just judgment on Hophni and Phinehas and the entire family, including Eli. I gave to the house of your father all my offerings by fire from the people of Israel. Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I command for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel? So obviously Eli bears responsibility in the fact that he refused to make certain, which was his job, that everything he'd been given by God was being used to honor God. And when you read that phrase, why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings, both in the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, and the Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they read, why then do you, and the you is plural, so it includes all of them. Why then do you look with greedy eye? So it's not just that they failed to go through the proper procedures with the sacrifices. It's not just that the traditions of the priests had gotten away from the letter of the law, which they had, but understand the severity of this judgment was for much more than that. It was the wanton abuse of all that God had entrusted them with by taking the offerings, the sacrifices, the servants at the temple, and the female worshipers, and using all of it for their own personal gain. You see, and the truth is, all of us have been given gifts and talents and resources and opportunities to be used in service to God, to bring him glory and to point others to him, which leads us to the third question that is so important that we ask ourselves: how does my life make the most of what God has given me? Which, to be sure, is always an important question for us to ask ourselves, no matter what's happening in the world around us at any given point in history. But listen, it is in times of crisis that other people pay attention to the answer to that question more than any other time. Because again, one of the core teachings of the Christian faith is dying to ourselves so that Christ might be exalted in us. And yet, if we're leveraging most of what God has given us to benefit ourselves more than anyone else, well, then how does that line up with what we say we believe? This was the very problem with Eli and Hophni and Phinehas. Their titles and positions and responsibilities to God's people, everything their entire lives were structured around, was supposed to point people to God, when instead they were driving people away from him because of their own greed and selfishness. And as the story unfolds in the coming weeks, the harder that times become for the Israelites, the more stark the contrast becomes between this priestly family and Samuel. Which is exactly what happens with professing Christians today when our world or our country or our community or our family or anyone else in our lives are facing hard times. Because in every age, including this one, there have been religious people who don't live out what they say they believe, and they may think what they're doing for their own benefit by holding on to what he's given them for themselves, when ultimately what they're actually doing is driving other people away from God. Right? Claiming the name Christian It means we're claiming to be like Christ, the one who gave everything, including his own life, away to save lost people. If we're claiming to be Christians, that means laying our lives down for other people, because whatever you're going through right now, it isn't a bump in the road of your life. It's not something unexpected. It is for us, but not for God. It's what you were created for such a time as this. Why? To give yourself away so that you can point other people to Jesus Christ. And listen, the world is watching. The people around you are watching. Your country is watching. Your community is watching. Your family is watching. The people who are in it with you are watching. Because the crisis you're in has drawn the focus of everyone involved onto the same thing at the same time. What an opportunity. What an incredibly powerful and rare opportunity for you, follower of Christ, to respond to something that everyone is paying attention to. What an unbelievably powerful and rare opportunity you have right now to point people to Jesus by serving them more than you serve yourself, and by making the most of every opportunity to share his love and everything he's given you with people who may have never been open to the gospel before now. I'm just saying, let's not blow it. Don't miss it because you think you're not the right person for the job, because the fact is, this is the very reason you were created, to shine the love of Christ and the life of Christ into other people who are searching for both. It's the very reason you were put here on this earth for such a time as this. Let's pray.